Hi, I'm Tatiana Falcon, a child psychiatrist here at Cleveland Clinic Epilepsy Center. Welcome to a series of webinars targeting educational topics for parents of children with epilepsy. We assemble a great team of doctors, psychologists, nurses, social workers, parents, patients with epilepsy, and epilepsy educators to help you navigate all the different challenges that epilepsy may present. Project Care for Epilepsy is designed to improve care coordination, increase social support, provide education, and increase engagement for teens with epilepsy and their families. This project is supported by the Health Resources Services Administration of the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. The information, content, and conclusions presented here are those of the authors and are not the official position or policy of HRSA, Health and Human Services, or the U.S. government. At the end of each webinar, there will be a link to answer 4 questions about the new topic you just learned about. Please take a moment to answer this quick survey. It will help us understand your needs better. The Cleveland Clinic Epilepsy Center welcomes and thank you for your participation in this educational series.
Hello, I am Sammy Juhn, and I'm a social worker in the Pediatric Epilepsy Center here at the Cleveland Clinic. This is my colleague, Denise Hagen. She is also a social worker in the Pediatric Epilepsy Center. Here today we have Adrian and Kim Go, and they are here to give us a patient and parent perspective about their journey through Adrian's epilepsy diagnosis.
First, I'd like to say how excited I am that you're both here.
Thank you.
And I thought we could start with Adrian. Can you tell me what types of symptoms and things that you may remember when you were first diagnosed?
Well, unfortunately, I don't remember a whole lot from back then because between then and now, I had a left frontal lobectomy, so I'm missing a lot of those memories. But from what I do remember, I remember that I would be very fatigued a lot. I would just become really, really overwhelmingly tired. And I couldn't quite understand why. I would also lose chunks of time. I would be, sitting in my math class, and I look at the clock, and oh, it's 1 o'clock, and then I, feels like I blink, and all of a sudden I'm in the hallway, and it's 1:45, and that is, it's a scary thing, and obviously seizures. Having a tonic-clonic seizure in my orchestra class was what led to the diagnosis.
Wow, I can't even imagine going through that. From a mother's perspective, what do you remember as Adrian was going through all this?
Sure. Denise, it was a roller coaster of emotions from the very beginning and an ongoing transition period. I remember receiving the first call from the day he had the seizure in his orchestra class, and I couldn't believe that that's what they were calling me to tell me, that they were transporting him to the hospital. And I remember talking with the band director, who was the first to respond to Adrian, and saying, he doesn't have seizures. What do you mean he had a seizure? And that was just the beginning. I felt some guilt at that point because once Adrian was diagnosed, I learned a lot more about epilepsy and seizures in general. And Adrian's medical history started at the age of 4 when he was diagnosed with a craniopharyngioma, a rare type of brain tumor. And so we had been through a lot over the years. And I remembered at that point, at every single neurology appointment, they would ask me, any seizures? They had their checklist. And I would quickly and confidently say no. However, after I learned a lot more about epilepsy, he probably had, in fact, been having seizures for about 8 years. And so felt a lot of guilt that as a parent, I had no idea. He would zone out, and we just thought it was that he was deep in thought. And he was clumsy, but, he was clumsy. And there were times that I remembered finding a lot of foamy saliva on his pillow in the morning and thinking that he really drooled a lot. Or other times in hindsight that he had fallen out of bed, and I would hear a loud thump, but by the time I would get upstairs, he would be what I perceived to be sound asleep on the floor beside his bed. and wouldn't wake up when I would pick him up. So probably was having seizures during the night as well. I was scared. I remember the first seizure that I actually witnessed, the first tonic-clonic seizure that I witnessed, as soon as it was over and he was settled into a sleep, running to the next room and vomiting because it was so upsetting to me. And at the same time feeling relieved that he was alive and he was here. So a full range of emotions over the course of the past, how many years?
Sounds like it.
Over 14 years total, yes.
So knowing Adrian, he did have surgery. What kinds of concerns and issues did you have when you were deciding to do that?
Sure. Having been through a craniectomy when he was 4 years old, and remembering how it felt to sit in a waiting room, anxiously waiting for 10, 11, 12 hours, the thought of putting him through that again was very scary. However, over the course of the year after he was diagnosed and before he did have that partial left frontal lobectomy, he was on probably 5 or 6 different medications and wasn't really responding effectively to any of those. As a parent, it was really hard to have my son begging me to do something because he didn't like the way he felt from the medicines and he didn't like the seizures that he was having. He just wanted it to be over. So we did a lot of research. We even went and sought a second opinion at Johns Hopkins University before making the decision. But the reality was that both Cleveland Clinic and Johns Hopkins were telling us that the focal point of his seizures was probably in the heart of some scarred tissue in the left frontal lobe, and that being scarred from the radiation that he had received, as well as the first surgery and that incision site. So that was how we came to that decision. We talked to a lot of people. We asked what the probable outcomes would be. I think probably one of the scariest things was knowing that they wanted to wake him during the surgery because of Broca's area and the language area. So that was a little unsettling for me to know that
I would imagine.
he was going to be alert during a portion of the surgery so that they could ask him to talk to ensure that they didn't cut too far. So lots of scary things, but the thought of him not having seizures and the risks associated with the seizures and what appeared to be ongoing, complications from the medicine seemed to outweigh. So the benefits seemed to outweigh the risks with that.
Good news is I was pretty talkative during the surgery.
Apparently so. Apparently so. That's what we hear.
Wow. What would you both think that parents would need to know when their child is first diagnosed?
I think it's important to educate yourself as much as possible and really ensure that your entire team of doctors and support people are there with you. One of the things that I found helpful was just to continually educate myself from reliable sources, to ask a lot of questions, to read the materials that are provided, and the other thing is really to know the language. So as a parent who all of a sudden was inundated with all of this new information about epilepsy, and to learn that he really had been having seizures and I didn't know what the different types of seizures were. So I was really quick to try to understand what those different seizures were. The other thing is really to establish communication, especially if your child's of school age, to communicate with the school, to talk with them, to educate them as much as possible. We had the epilepsy group come in and make a presentation to his teachers. We invited them to come to the school, and I think they made a presentation to students as well.
Yes.
So we wanted to make sure everybody knew as much as they possibly could know. The other thing was to have that communication. So we made sure that the school had a seizure plan that Adrian was a part of writing. So it was very personalized at the top. This is what happens. This is what it feels like to me. This is what it looks like to you. So just kind of real communication with them, as well as I had a spreadsheet. I'm an Excel person, and so I had my own little document with dates and what the doses of his medicine were at the time that any kind of event happened, what happened, how long it lasted, so that we were prepared to work with the team of doctors so that they knew exactly what was happening day to day.
Sounds like great advice. Adrian?
I think, and this is more not necessarily towards the parents, but towards the patients. I think one of the biggest things that really hits you is this is a scary diagnosis. And, like my mom had touched on, knowledge is a tremendous asset. So it's good to sort of know what is sort of going on. And I guess that was one of my coping mechanisms when I was first diagnosed, was I tried to learn, too, what was going on, because I didn't really understand what was going on with my own body. And so like one of the first things that I did after being diagnosed was I asked one of my teachers if I could give a presentation so that I could let the other students know sort of what was going on.
It's a wonderful idea.
Yeah, the other thing for patients is you feel very isolated when you're diagnosed. You think, oh man, none of my friends are going to want to be friends with me anymore because now I have seizures. And I think that, for one, it's important to let everyone know that you're no different because you have seizures. You're just you plus seizures. But also know that you're not alone as you may feel, because even though it may feel like you're the only one, know that there is a whole community out there of people who are in a very similar situation to you. And if you just reach out to some of those people, you can find, a huge support network.
Sounds wonderful. Sammy and I, being social workers, we often work with families and assist them through that whole coping process. What suggestions would you have for our parents as they're trying to cope?
Sure. I think in our family, and again, we were pros by the time Adrian was diagnosed with epilepsy at dealing with medical conditions, from the tumor to the interferon treatments to radiation, a whole host of endocrine problems that evolved. So we had learned really early on that it was important to just take one day at a time. And whatever obstacle you face today, you deal with it. And you look for something positive in that, because there always are positive outcomes. And so we found that that was helpful. And I think there were times that I took 1 hour at a time. You couldn't even cope with a whole day. And to just really look and educate yourself as much as possible and find who your truly supportive people are and identify them and use them.
Sounds like you really struggled to have some sort of a normal life. Did it ever go back to normal?
I don't even know what normal is for most of us. And so as a counselor, I remember I would say that to families. And so maybe, I took a lot of the advice that I would give to other people in my clinical practice as a parent, and looking at whatever was happening that day was normal for us. And, so to really normalize things to the point that, earlier on, as Adrian was receiving radiation treatments, his younger brother was only 3 years old, and I remember him saying to me one day, when I have my radiation, will Adrian go with me? And I tried to assess, was I making this not so normal life normal to the point that he would expect unhealthy things? But I think that was what really worked for us, was that whatever it was, it had to be normal, because if it was traumatic, we would have to deal with the distress from that. So I think whatever is happening that day is normal, and you'll find that normal is different at every single step along the way, because things change as a result of that.
Speaking of your other son,
Yes.
do you feel that there's any type of special dynamic just having a brother that has chronic illness?
I think we would both emphatically say yes. It certainly changes the family dynamic as a parent. As much as you try to give each child what they need, being here today, medical appointments, hospitalizations take away time from that other child. And so there were 3 and 4 and days or a week at a time that I would be here with Adrian. When he was on the epilepsy monitoring unit, there were always appointments, and there's the concern of what you're watching going on at home. So all of a sudden, this little brother who was in 4th grade had to learn about epilepsy and had to learn about precautions. And so there were times that he was afraid his brother would have a seizure, so he stopped inviting friends to the house. And a lot of anger and resentment that comes along with this. And I think Adrian's perspective as the brother is worth looking at as well.
Yeah, and I can tell, because I've known him all his life, that my little brother he's very angry that I have to go through all this. And, I don't want to say that he's jealous, but when you have a kid with a chronic medical condition, it's like my mom is raising 3 kids. She's got me, she's got my brother, and she's got my medical conditions. And so it probably feels to him like I'm getting 2 kids worth of attention because I'm getting, the mom-son attention as well as the medical guardian attention. And it's clear that it stresses him out, and intellectually I know that he's mad at the condition and the circumstances, but when he gets really angry, it feels like he's mad at me. And I know that mentally that's not true. He's not mad at me, but emotionally it does hurt a lot.
You had mentioned, Kim, that you are a working parent.
Yes.
Any special challenges in the workplace that come along with that?
Unfortunately, yes. So at the time that Adrian was diagnosed, I had been in the school district where I was working for about 12 years. And at the time he was diagnosed and was having, the seizures were rapidly out of control once he was diagnosed. And he was calling home from school almost daily because, of course, the school isn't sure what to do, and they really, if there's going to be a problem, want him out of the school. But what I found was, Grandma would come, but she was afraid of what was happening, or some of our other support people. So I found myself leaving work. To the point that as his surgery neared, I actually hired someone, a nurse aide, who would pick him up from school, take him home, and let him sleep. What I found, though, was I had a new supervisor at the time, and her perception, having not known me the prior 12 years, she was new to our district, was that I wasn't really a dedicated employee, and I apparently didn't have things under control. And so, it created an extremely stressful environment on top of an already stressful home life. And ultimately, I ended up leaving that employer and choosing to go somewhere else because I didn't feel that I had the support that I needed to do to meet my first priority, which was being a mom.
I know that you're a great advocate. I've known you for many years as a social worker here at Cleveland Clinic. What kinds of things worked for you and what kinds of things didn't?
Sure. I think I tried to make sure everything worked, And as a parent, you need to know that you're the expert on your child, and it doesn't matter how much everyone else, especially at the school level, is an expert. I did have a few things in my favor, one being that I worked in a school district, so I knew how school systems worked, and I was able to speak their language. The other thing was my background is both as a clinical and a school counselor, so I had the advantages of that as well. What I found was that I needed to know what Adrian needed before I asked anyone for that. And so the other thing was we needed to have our entire team. And I wanted to ensure that we had all of the resources in the community in place as well. So we were connected with Bureau for Children with Medical Handicap. As soon as Adrian was old enough, I knew that Bureau for Vocational Rehab would be able to assist him we explored things with Social Security disability, because you never know what direction things are going to go. As I said, you take one day at a time. The other key person for us were his neurologist, his psychiatrist, and the neuropsychologist who did the evaluations. And so it was really important to me that we prepared before we went into any meeting. So again, we would have that list of what we were looking for, more than just having reports sent. If you can get the doctors to participate in those meetings, not necessarily face-to-face, but we always had the neuropsychologist on the phone conference to really explain what Adrian's deficits were, despite what the school was perceiving as his abilities. And so that was very helpful. So I think you need to have everything organized. And if that's not your forte and those aren't your areas of expertise, and you don't have that professional background, to find the people, there are advocates out there, to find those people who will help you do that and to be prepared.
Sounds great. Sammy?
So I'd like to learn a little bit more about what your experience was like educationally having seizures. So can you tell me a little bit about how you feel like seizures impacted your education?
Well, they had a pretty tremendous impact. Like I touched on earlier, I would lose half an hour, 45 minutes at a time, and that's half an hour to 45 minutes of material that I wasn't learning. And unfortunately, I had a lot of absent seizures in addition to like the tonic-clonic and complex partial. So to a teacher, it would look like I was one of those students that just sort of sits and, stares at the wall. And so it would have looked to a teacher like I just wasn't interested, when in fact I was very interested, but I wasn't capable of, I wasn't aware. And, once I, got back into everything after my surgery, I had to have some accommodations in place. And I remember one of my teachers, he did not understand what I was going through. Because obviously when I'm talking to you, you would have no idea. Right. And so he would, I'll never forget when he said, I don't know why you need to take your test in another room. You look fine to me. And he just didn't get that I wasn't able to focus on the test in that room at the time. And so it did have a huge impact on my academic performance and on my school.
So with some of that, you mentioned that you were able to have some accommodations or services in place. Did the school implement anything formally, like an IEP, 504 plan, something like that?
Yes. In middle school, I did have a Section 504 plan, which in high school sort of got reevaluated, and it turned into an IEP when it really dawned on the people in the disability department at the high school that I did have some form of traumatic brain injury. Mm-hmm. And so, like, in terms of the accommodations that were put into place by that, I was allowed, one of the biggest things was I was allowed to have extended time on my exams. Because when I was on these anti-epileptic drugs, it felt like I was sort of moving at half speed, and I felt very out of it. Mm-hmm. And so they gave me extended time so that I could actually work through the questions at a pace that, was slower than what most people would work through questions at. They also allowed me to take my exams, like I said, in a separate room, so that, even though I know that I've got extended time, it's distracting when, as you get towards the end of the period, kids are running up to the teacher and handing in their tests, and I'm sitting there working. That way I didn't have that sort of a stress. And the last big thing that was put into place in terms of improving my academic performance, I was allowed to, on like extended response questions and things that would have required a longer answer, it's hard for me to sort of write that down as, the way that it goes through my head. And so they allowed me to use Dragon dictation software. And that wasn't originally like provided by the school. I had to ask specifically for it. But once I did, they provided that for me, and that was a huge help, a huge accommodation. On the not necessarily the strictly academic performance side of things, they did allow me to, if I felt like this horrible fatigue, they would allow me to go to sort of the nurse's station and sleep for an hour or however long I needed to in order to sort of recover. And that was also a huge help.
So, putting these things into place, lots of times there are things going on behind the scenes to advocate for these things and make sure what's supposed to be provided is. Mom, what was your experience with the IEP 504 process like?
As I said earlier, you have to be prepared and know what you want, because the reality is that you are the expert, the medical experts are the experts. And so when you have that team together, they can't really question what that, in terms of schools, they're required to provide what are reasonable accommodations. And so you want to be sure that what you're requesting is reasonable and that it's well supported in terms of that. So that's where it's beneficial to have that whole team on your side so that they're providing the medical evidence and the psychological evidence of what those needs are. I was going to comment that, really the need for a lot of the accommodations that Adrian had were a result of the damage from that partial lobectomy and the executive dysfunction that occurred as a result of that.
So, obviously your mom is a very strong advocate for you in school, and she was able to pull some really great community resources in to advocate. Did you feel like you could advocate for yourself during those times also? Like when you were mentioning some resistance from a professor, were you able to? To
be completely honest, I was not really able to advocate for myself in high school, and even now in college, it's hard for me to advocate because it's one of those things where most people don't think about it, but it's very hard to go up to someone who, like in college, is a total stranger, or even in high school, even your best friends, and tell them, I have these problems. You don't want to be the sick kid, and you don't want that sort of label attached to you, and unfortunately that's what it feels like when you have to go and say, I physically cannot do this, 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 and this. Sometimes it feels like sort of like an admitting defeat, but it's really not. It's asking for help, and if you can ask for the help that you need, everything becomes so much easier, and you can be so much more successful once you sort of accept that you have a problem and then ask for help.
So it seems almost like you experience a conflict with that, knowing that you might need some help, but then you have a perception that you don't want to ask for it because you don't want to feel like you're different from other people.
That is exactly the conflict that I go through in my head. Intellectually, I know I need help with this, this, and this, and then emotionally, I don't want to be judged, and I don't want to be, have like a label attached to me. And I mean, going through high school, I had many of my teachers in high school didn't really understand, and so they would all be, I hate to use the word judgmental, but that's what it felt like.
Mm-hmm. So what was that like with peers, and how did you address that? Did you ever tell fellow students that you had seizures, or do you feel like?
I have been very quiet all through high school and even into college on my medical history because I really don't want, because it's a difficult thing for a lot of times, especially when I was in middle school and high school, for another kid to wrap their head around, okay, he's the same person, he just has seizures now. because it feels like there's this huge thing that sort of comes in, and it's hard to try and explain to your friends, it's still me, I just have
Right.
seizures.
Right. Do you feel like having seizures held you back or limited you from doing school activities or other activities, things that you wanted to do?
Well, I guess fortunately, I'm not like an athlete, so like the physical things that would probably get affected by seizures didn't really affect me. But I mean, it's funny because like my favorite after school activity is school. But I took part in a couple of different clubs, and there were times when I wasn't able to show up for meetings for weeks on end because I was having seizures and I had to go home. And so that definitely impacted my ability to actually take part in these groups.
What would you and Mom, what would you guys recommend telling either fellow students or the school about seizures and epilepsy? Or would you recommend that parents share that with the school and with peers and students?
I think it's important to communicate that and communicate repeatedly and on an ongoing basis. So what worked for us was maybe after a medical appointment to communicate that to his entire team of teachers and the administration. Gee, he had an MRI today, he had an EEG today, this is the update, or he's on a change of medication, this is what's going to be happening. So again, that just constant and open line of communication and understanding how he's feeling about it, and really being a fierce advocate for your kids as a parent. And so when, I had a teacher at one point really imply that Adrian was just lazy and he wasn't working to his fullest potential because he had seen his math scores and knew that Adrian should be at the top of the class. Ironically, a year later, when Adrian had that same teacher again, the teacher came back and apologized to me and said, I see now what you're saying. And he had no control over that. So I think really just being firm and persistent with that educational process pays off in the long run.
Absolutely.
Yeah, in an ideal, perfect world, I would say you should disclose everything so that everyone understands fully. But I know that this is far from a perfect world, and I know how difficult and scary it is to try and explain this to people that might not have a full grasp on it. And so my best advice is to tell people as much as you are comfortable telling, and then maybe a little bit more for good measure.
Right.
And unfortunately, that's the only advice in terms of how much you should tell.
Adrian's actually implementing something new this year. He's going into his second year of college, and that communication about what his needs were and his accommodations maybe wasn't as effective last year as it could be. And so he has actually written a letter to each of his professors that he's going to present them with a list of the accommodations through the Disability Services Office. And so if there's, with his history, with his full neurological history, so that if there's anything he doesn't tell them when he meets with them face to face, or that they don't remember, they'll have something in their file that is a summary again. So I think he's really excited to do that.
And I think that sounds like a good way to communicate what your needs are in a way you're comfortable with. As you said, sometimes it feels like you don't want to feel differently, or you don't want to admit defeat, as you said. So that's a way for you to be able to advocate for yourself in a way that you're comfortable with and you're happy with. So I think that that's a really good idea.
Right.
Very good. At any point throughout schooling, elementary school, middle school, high school, and even in college, is bullying something you ever experienced?
Bullying is something that I've experienced all through high school, not quite as much in college, but definitely in middle and high school. And it's funny because it's not, most kids who are diagnosed, they think when you say bullying, they're going to think, oh yeah, there's the kid that sits next to me that, bullies me, and most people don't realize that my biggest bullies in middle school and especially in high school were my teachers.
Wow.
Because they were the ones that really, I don't want to say put me down, but they made accusations that just were not true simply because of what they observed, and they didn't ever consider that there were other circumstances. And unfortunately, there's a tremendous stigma attached to an epilepsy diagnosis. And I don't think that everyone really realizes fully sort of the extent of this. In addition to, there's a stereotype of what a seizure looks like, and everyone, when you say seizure, automatically they think tonic-clonic, on the floor, spasming. When in reality, it can be as simple as sort of staring off into space or wandering around in circles. And all of those are types of seizures as well. And so there's that, as well as, and I remember when I first was diagnosed, and it's sort of it's a funny story that I like. It's not funny per se, but it's kind of funny. The first time I had it in like a classroom that had lots of other students, I remember I was going unconscious, and the last thing I heard was the kid that was sitting next to me yell, "I didn't do it." And then the next day, my best friend since first grade, he came up to me and he was so excited because he thought that someone had killed me.
Oh my gosh.
Because someone had said that, you had gotten shot. And I had to, naturally rumors spread.
Right.
And I had to explain that, I'm not dead. I'm here. I had a seizure. And then I had another kid, and it was a very innocent question, but it goes to show what a lot of people think. He asked me if are you retarded now? And that is that's a very charged word nowadays.
Absolutely.
And but that really it really hurts when that feels like the perception that people have of you.
So how have you done emotionally sort of combating that stigma that you feel like there is, and some of the questions you've been asked and some of the resistance you felt from whether it was teachers or other students, and their lack of education about this?
Sure. So yeah, like I had said, when I was first diagnosed, I asked one of my teachers if I could give a presentation to my class just to sort of explain, what's going on and answer any questions that they might have. And even to this day, I'll answer questions. It's just I'm very hesitant to tell people my medical history. But if they ask a question about it, I'll answer honestly. It's just that it's very hard for me to bring up the topic on my own. And so, my biggest asset has been knowledge, and the fact that I know what it is and what it does and what it feels like. And so I can sort of explain that to people. It's just hard to explain it, in personal terms.
Absolutely.
Because it is a very difficult topic to broach.
Absolutely.
It's depressing.
It is. It's incredibly depressing. And, through high school and into college, I have had really bad depression and really bad anxiety. I'm on Zoloft to combat that. But like in college, even doing something completely mundane, I would have horrible panic attacks where I would just, I'd be doing something simple, like doing my laundry or taking a shower, and all of a sudden I get this awful sense of like something really, really bad is going to happen. And, this is sort of a culmination of an entire lifetime of stuff that I've gone through, but it really makes me even more anxious because that's what it felt like when I had a seizure. And so that, it sort of snowballs like that. And so what I did is I went to a counselor and therapist, and that was a huge help, was being able to talk to someone and have someone sort of walk you, and inch by inch I was able to do things normally without having these panic attacks. But if ever there's you're stressed or something, there is no shame in seeing a counselor or a therapist.
So a significant part of you coping with some of the stigmas and maybe ways that you have felt like seizures have limited you, or how others have reacted to some of your seizures and things, has been to go to counseling,
Yes.
to educate people, educate yourself, to feel like there is a better understanding out there. Are there any other ways that you feel like you've gotten through some of these difficult times emotionally?
Yeah. Well, those are the big ways. And I have always had a very sunny disposition. I tend to be very optimistic, and almost to a fault, because sometimes I make things out to be much better than they may actually be. But one thing that has really helped me cope is, if I'm going through something bad, I just say to myself, okay, bad times pass. Things cannot be bad forever. And I know that if I sort of ride it out and deal with it in the moment, on the other side of it, things are only going to get better. And that, that optimism is what has really carried me through, and allowed me to sort of get to where I'm at.
That's a beautiful insight.
Thank you.
Welcome. So now, knowing that you are in college, what sorts of services or accommodations have they given you now? Knowing that you've sort of had those 504 plan IEP, what are they doing now?
So it's very similar accommodations. I'm permitted 50% extended time on all exams. I will be testing I test in a separate location where it's just me and a proctor. I'm permitted to sort of dictate my responses through the Dragon Speak software. Obviously, it's much more closely monitored because you can't have kids looking up answers, so
Right.
it's very closely monitored, and they cut off your Wi-Fi for that. But I'm able to dictate responses. I have it's a pen. It's called LISW-S, and it's really, I love technology, and this is a really cool pen where you have like a notebook that is pretty much a regular notebook with a bunch of tiny dots on it. And as you're writing with the pen is recording your lecture. When you go back to study your notes, you tap your pen on the point in the notes, and it'll play what was going on at that point in the lecture.
Technology is an amazing thing.
And so what I will have going into next year is I will have sort of a scribe provided by the school that is taking lecture notes with one of these LISW-S pens.
Interesting.
And that way I'll be able to, sort of go over these notes, because what I've found is, I'll get like really wrapped up in the lecture and I'll forget to write my notes. And so I'll come out of a semester with like a total of 8 pages of notes, and obviously that's completely inadequate for a college workload. And so I've got some extra services to help with that. Obviously, medical services, if I've got medications that I take that I have to go to the med center for. I'm going to be having someone at the counseling center that I'll be meeting with. And I have all these extra supports in place at school that I'll be, going to. I have an executive skills coach that I'll be meeting with. Once the year really gets going, it'll be, face-to-face maybe twice a week, but every day I'll probably be calling her to discuss, what's going on, check my grades,
That's awesome.
and the like, yeah.
So when you guys were looking at colleges, were some of the services that were able to be offered, was that a big part of the consideration of where you?
Yes.
We had a whole list of
Chose to be?
questions,
I
as
think
you can
that's great.
imagine,
That's great.
that we asked. And, Adrian was really looking at a lot of competitive schools. And it was disappointing to see that, the range of services. So that kind of really curbed the decision on a couple
Sure.
of really good schools because they didn't have those disability services. And so we went through the accommodations process. And again, having that whole team as a part of the process
Right.
has been really instrumental.
What advice would both of you give for patients and parents who are looking at colleges? What to look for, maybe what questions to ask?
Sure. I find you find as a parent that it's kind of scary. And so a lot of times people will ask me, because Adrian goes to school 2 states away, 3 states away. How do you do that? But I think you just can't allow that disability to limit you.
Absolutely.
And to pursue his dreams. And so, that's a big part, but always making sure that communication between the two of you is in place and that all of those services are where they need to be. And then look at, what else can you do to make that transition easier? So at the University of Rochester, he was able to go early for a disability orientation, so like a week early. So we chose to participate in that. What can you do to make sure that he's able to manage his own medications? So we've actually got a new system in place for that this year where they come prepackaged every day and labeled by the day, morning and evening. So I think you just kind of learn as you go.
Building
And-
new routines.
Right, right. But not be so afraid that it holds your kid back.
Absolutely. Adrian, do you have
Yeah,
anything
I
you'd like
think
to add?
when you're looking at colleges, don't try and limit yourself. Seek out colleges that other kids at your academic standing and your intelligence level are seeking out. And if there's a college that you really, really want to go to, definitely don't hesitate to go just because you have epilepsy or you have chronic medical conditions. And then once you go to these, schools that you really want to go to, see what they can do to help you succeed. Because one of the big things in college is they want kids to succeed. It's not like colleges are intentionally trying to make you fail. They want you to succeed. It's just that some colleges are better equipped for people with disabilities than others. And so just, basically cross-reference your list of schools where you want to go with the list of schools that have good disability services that will really allow you to thrive in the college environment.
And support you the way you need to be.
Yes.
Absolutely. Denise, did you have any other
I have
questions?
one last question for Adrian. Where are you at in your life right now and your future plans?
I am currently at the University of Rochester. I'm going to be starting my second year there. My major is brain and cognitive science, and I have a minor in music. My future goal is to go on to grad school and get my PhD and do some research into musical cognition, which, I think that music has always been very therapeutic for me. And I guess just, moving forward, I have gotten so much from the field of neuroscience and musical cognition. I think it's my turn to sort of give back.
Sounds wonderful. Well, on that encouraging note, I would like to again thank you for coming and sharing a bit of your life with us today.
Thanks for
Thank you.
inviting us.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.